Hello, my name is Gary Davis with the Autodesk Media and Entertainment Group. Today's webinar is part 2 in a two-part series where we're taking a look at the entire Autodesk Media and Entertainment Creation Suite Ultimate. If you missed last month's webinar, myself and Lee Fraser took a look at 3ds Max and Maya versions 2013 respectively. And today we're going to be taking a look at several different packages that round out the Entertainment Suite. Our presentations in this session will be presented by Mark Schoennagel, Marcel de Jong, Kyle Runciman, as well as Chris Jong. Today's agenda for rounding out the Ultimate Suite is Softimage, Sketchbook Designer, MotionBuilder, as well as Mudbox. And once again, the Autodesk Ultimate Suite includes all of the packages that you're seeing on screen right now, as well as 3ds Max and Maya. So with that, I'll pass it over to Mark, and we'll start off in Softimage.
Hi, I'm Mark Schoennagel, and what we're going to take a look at next is Softimage 2013 and the new features found within this release. Now, the big feature in Soft 2013 is the addition of CrowdFX. CrowdFX is a full crowd simulation tool set built upon Softimage ICE technology. If you're unfamiliar with Softimage and ICE, Softimage is a full animation modeling package, just like 3D Studio Max and Maya. We have this unique tree-based system that we see down here at the bottom called ICE, and this is actually a visual programming language. It's fully multi-threaded and allows you to create really just about any tool that you would normally create through traditional coding, except here we're using nodes. Now what we've done for the new release is actually built a collection of these new nodes and tools that allow you to create, like I mentioned, crowd simulations. So here we're taking a look at a stadium crowd, and I'm just moving this box back and forth, and you can see that's triggering the different characters to move into kind of doing the wave there, if you will. And this is actually all very easy to do. A lot of this stuff you can do with these building blocks here. You can see we've got several different ice trees in this particular simulation. And this is a simulation. I can zoom in on these and show you some of the different nodes that create this. Now, this looks a little bit complicated. For those of you that are familiar with ICE, this looks a little bit familiar. For those of you that are not, probably wondering what all these nodes do. Now, a lot of this stuff is actually done for you, this rigging up of these nodes. But then to take this simulation tool set further, you can actually expand on that. So what I'm going to do is walk you through creating a basic crowd, and we'll actually export these into Max and Maya, and show you a couple different scenes that show some different types of crowds. So again, here we're just taking a look at a stadium crowd. What I'm going to do is just go ahead and get a new scene, and we're going to start from scratch by building a pedestrian crowd. Okay, so we're going to start off in the ICE module, and for those of you familiar with Softimage, we'll notice that we have a few new buttons down here in the bottom left under this heading now called CrowdFX. And inside of CrowdFX, you'll find several different menu items, which will allow you to not only create characters, import animation, but also control various aspects of your crowd simulation. So I just went ahead and did a default pedestrian, and what that did was it loaded up this character into Softimage, and this character is actually all ready to go to be turned into a large crowd simulation. So just to show you a few things that it did, or how this character works, rather. It's basically a low-resolution, low-polygon count mesh like we see here. This character uses the standard MotionBuilder rig, although one thing that's very important to point out is that any rigged character inside Softimage will work with CrowdFX. This just happens to use the by default the MotionBuilder rig, which is great because any animation that you author with MotionBuilder, with Maya, Max, whatever, you can export that into the FBX file format, load that up, and then use it here as one of your animation options. Now, we actually ship with several different animations, which is what you see right here. Things like walk, run, sitting, waving, jogging. And these are great. Some of these you'd use for a pedestrian crowd, things that have locomotion to them, things like the walk, the run, the jog. And then other ones like standing, jumping up and down, waving, those would be more for stadium crowds where your characters do not have any locomotion. So what we want to do is just load up several different animations on this character and show you how we can control their behavior. So we'll start off by just selecting the idle pose, the walk, and the run pose. And we'll just load those into our selected actions area. Click apply action. It's going to load those actions onto the actual character. There we go. And really, that's pretty much it. From here, to create our crowd, all we have to do is click on the simulation button. And in this case, we want to do the pedestrian crowd. And you can see stadium crowd is right below it. The stadium crowd will actually create the bleachers and everything, put the different characters on the rows like we saw in that first example. Pedestrian crowd is going to do what we're going to see here in just a second. Right here. So I'm just going to zoom out a little bit. And incidentally, what it was doing there was actually creating for us behind the scenes all the different ice trees. So what we have here is an emitter, this square right here. and if I just pin this property page open again, this is the basic controls for the emitter. If I press the simulation button, right away we can see we have 20 characters, number of actors right there, that just began walking forward. What's great about CrowdFX is I can easily change that value. So for instance, let's just roll back a little bit. If I set this to, say, 108 characters, press play. Look at that. Now we have 108 characters moving around. Increases value 428. And we press simulate, and boom, now we have 478 characters. Now, what's great here with CrowdFX is you can have thousands and thousands of characters. I've actually rendered a scene with about 30,000 characters. Really, it's just a matter of the amount of RAM you have in your machine and how many characters you feel like having in your simulation. So I'm just going to bump this down to something a little more manageable for the demo, like 40. And let's take a look at some of the different options that we have just out of the box for controlling these guys. So again, we're looking at the basic emitter property page right here, but under the simulation menu, we'll find several other different menu options. So if I click first on the click inspect collision avoidance, you can see we get this property page here, and I'll close up the emitter one so we can see our screen, our full character set there. And you can see we have a target speed value. So I'm going to bump this up to, say, 25. And before I press simulate again, I'm going to open up another tab here for collision avoidance, and you can see we have some other parameters in here. We have things like the acceleration, the deacceleration, thing like the actor thickness, which is going to control really how far they are apart from each other, almost like a bounding box. The field of view, just various parameters that will help the characters avoid one another. Again, here we have the target speed, and if we inspect their animation properties, you can see we have different values for the transition period. So how many frames is it going to take to get from the walk to the run? What's the minimum speed? So right now I've set the target speed to 25. The minimum speed is for a walk to run is going to be 21. So if I press simulate again, we should see those characters go into a nice little trot as they reach their target speed of 21, or 25 rather. They'll transition at a speed of 21. So a lot of this stuff is very easy, just simple out of the box. You can get your characters moving. Let's go ahead and adjust a few other parameters with this thing. So we'll close up some of these values. And so those are some of the parameters, to make them move around. And we're going to get into some more crazy ones in just a second. But some other fun things you can do are add things like goals, walls, even terrains. So for instance, if I want to add a wall, I'm just going to click on the draw wall button. We'll zoom out just a little bit, and I'll just draw a wall here. And the characters should now avoid this wall. Maybe we'll put a little bit more in their path here. Press the play key or simulate. And what you'll see now are the characters will walk around that wall. And you can actually create mazes. You can create all sorts of fun stuff with these different obstacles. And there you go. So they avoid that nicely. That guy there was walking to get around it. There we go. We can create goals. So let's just go back again to frame 1. And I'll click on crowd. And this time I'll add a goal. And maybe we'll put the goal out here and maybe over here a little bit. So if I press simulate again, you can see that now all those characters are going to aim for this goal. And once they reach the goal, they'll just sort of meander about unless you have another goal. And then they'll walk to the next goal. So you can really have several different goals set up, several different things for them to avoid. Another nice thing that you can do is add a terrain. So I've gone ahead and created a terrain, which I have hidden. I'll just go ahead and unhide that. And maybe for now we'll just delete our wall so we can see this a little bit better. And just by deleting that object, they're no longer going to recognize that wall, so you don't have to go and rewire any of that. But you can see here I've added this terrain, and if I press simulate now, the characters are just simply walking right through the terrain, so that's no good. Well, watch this. We go back to the beginning. All I need to do that as that terrain, even with the simulation running, is just go here to crowd, click on add terrain. You can see the mouse now says pick. I pick on the terrain, and look at that. Now they follow the terrain nicely, running right over that. So all of that stuff, very simple to set up, really with just a simple mouse click like we see here. But what's really happening under the scenes, as I mentioned, is this is all being driven by ICE. So let's go ahead and just go back to the first frame and take a look at some of the things that ICE is doing behind the scenes that you can get into if you really want to be more advanced and have some very sophisticated, cool crowd effects. Or again, you just use some of these menus to get some basic crowd simulations going. Now, if you do want to use some of the more advanced ICE functionality, we need to actually go into the ICE menu. So to do that, just click this little bottom left icon right here. It's probably the easiest way to do that. And that'll pop up our ICE menu tree. Now, I don't have anything actually populating the ICE graph right now, so let me just go ahead and do that. So we're going to take a look here in our Scene Explorer, and you can see we have a number of things in our Explorer. We have our pedestrian, which is the single character, and then we have our crowd right here. The crowd contains basically the actual simulation. You'll find that under the simulation node. There is a particle cloud. Now, really at the end of the day, the entire crowd simulation is just a big particle simulation. And using the various ice nodes, let's unlock that, using these various ice nodes, we're controlling that different particle animation. And I remember when we were using these different parameters here, or these different menu items to do things like inspect emitter, it would bring up this property page. Well, that property page is really this ice node right here. So if I double click on that, you can see it's the exact same parameters that we had when I did the inspect emitter. And essentially all of these menu items here are just calling various ice nodes within the ice tree. Here you can see is the one for collision avoidance. So again, this is where you can start to have some fun and override parameters that you'd normally have single values for, or actually be doing programmatically. So if I zoom in a little bit here, let's say we want to change the scaling of our character. So I'm going to select the emitter, and I'm going to use this little lock icon right there just to lock the emitter or lock this ice tree in place. So if I double click this, I have a parameter here for size. Now I could set the size to something like 2, and you can see now I've got a bunch of giants. Or what I could do is use an ice node to actually override this parameter. So over here to my left, we have this long list of different nodes. These are all the different nodes that you can use within ICE. Some of these are basic, if-then statements, things that generate sine, cosines, things like that. Remember, this is a full programming language. It's multi-threaded. It's a full visual programming language that essentially allows you to replace writing code with something like C++ with using these nodes. A lot of these nodes have, a lot of functionality already built into them, like the emit evenly from geometry. This would be essentially like a function in normal coding. Well, I'm going to bring up another function. I'm going to type the word rand, and that's going to show me anything that has something to do with randomize or rand. It's just basically a filter. So I'm going to grab this node here, randomize around value, and I'm going to plug it into the size input on the emit evenly from geometry. Now watch what happens right here in this menu tree. Right here it says size. As soon as I override that, I'm going to plug this node into there. Look, the word size disappears because now size is no longer a single value. Size is now being driven by the randomize around value node, which gives me a few parameters, a base value and a variance. So now I've got characters ranging from 0 plus or minus 2. So if you look, we probably have some, yep, there they are, negative characters because they're actually, upside down with a negative value. So I'm going to set the base value to 1 and maybe the variance of 0.2. And now you can see that we have characters that are a little bit taller, a little bit smaller than some of the other characters, which is great. So now if I press simulate, you can see we've got our characters walking, going to a run, and there they go. And what's also great is even though their size is different, if I change this to a variance of 1, now we're going to have some giants. You'll notice that their stride length is still fine. Everything still looks good there as far as their stride. The small guys are having to run quite a bit faster, at least their stride is, to keep up. And all that's handled all automatically within ICE. This little guy right there is really having to struggle to keep up. It's kind of funny. So anyway, let's stop this. Let's put this back at something a little bit more normal, like 0.2. And let's go ahead and bring in another character. Right now we're looking at all the same characters here. What if we want to vary this up a little bit? Well, because we have an active crowd, it's really simple to do. All we have to do is import a new model, and it's going to be smart enough to attach that to our existing crowd effect. So I've got a few different models here that I've set up. We'll just grab this one here. And now if I press play again, you can see we have new characters. But notice that they're not animating. I would either need to apply some animations to them, because I could give these characters different animation, or what we can do is open up our property page here and just use the use single animation sources option. And what that'll do is just basically make it so that all the characters are sharing the same information like we see here. So we're starting to get some little bit of variance in here. Now let's do something else with some of these ice nodes. Now if we go and refresh on our skeletal simulation ice node, ice tree rather, let's go ahead and just move forward a little bit. And I just want to show you a little way we can fix something. Now inside of here, the collision detection, it's pretty good, but it's a little bit off just out of the box. So we may see a few of the feet actually intersecting with the ground as we scrub through this. Let's see if I can find one. Sometimes it's a little better than... There we go. Like, see this guy's foot right there? So his foot has gone into the ground. And that might be fine if you're doing a very far away shot, but if you're getting really close, you want to have a little bit extra collision detection, maybe having a little bit of a control as to pushing that foot up, bending knee, making sure all that stuff works. So I'm going to type the word constraint, and we've got this new node here called constrain legs to ground constraint, or I'm sorry, crowd legs on ground constraint. Now there's a bunch of new ice compounds that are specifically designed to be used with CrowdFX. In fact, all the stuff for CrowdFX uses new ice nodes. Well, I can just plug that in, and as soon as I plug that in, if I step forward one frame, look, that foot is now nicely on the ground. So we're getting a nice ankle roll there as well. So we can also go into here and actually modify, add a little bit of offset if we need to as well. So this will really just allow you to further refine your crowd simulation, like so. And if I press simulate again, there we can see we have a bunch of characters moving around. Now, of course, one thing I find just remarkable is ice is always essentially alive. So if I go and just grab a brush here, look at that. I can always evaluating, always doing something. No matter what I do there, those characters are going to stick, which is very cool. So ice, extremely powerful, extremely fun. But this is just something, kind of the tip of the iceberg of stuff you can do. Setting up some basic goals, making a few characters moving around. There's a lot of great scenes in the samples directory, which I'll show you, that do a bunch of other neat things. So I've loaded an included scene called CrowdFX Military Parade. And if I press simulate, you can see we have a little parade of soldiers. And you'll notice we have a little flag here, which is simulating using the Sci-Flex cloth ice technology. And you can also see that some of these characters are wearing these little hats. And if we go back to the first frame, that's actually being procedurally controlled as well, which is just some of the fun stuff like we did in the first example with the stadium. I've got this null box, and you can see that whoever starts off inside this cube essentially gets a hat. And when we press play or simulate, there we go. Now those characters are wearing hats. And that's all programmably controllable. So if we go into our ice tree again, and we select our crowd, go into the simulation, and again, this scene is included with Softimage in the samples directory, so I invite you to take a look. Here we're just doing a simple test. If it's inside the null, we're going to set a condition to 1 or 2, and later on down we're going to assign the hat to that. So a lot of this stuff is just using simple logic, just expanding on some of the things that I've shown you already, and then using some of these different ice nodes that are included. Some of them specifically designed for crowds, some of them more generic, like the if, the test, which you use for all types of different simulations. And if we simulate that again, you can see they're going to eventually walk around the curve. And again, we got that flag. The flag is actually constrained. If you take a look, the flag is actually constrained to one of the joints on the character. So it could be on any one of these characters. You could have that flag, or numerous characters carry the flag. So that's pretty cool. Another neat scene I can show you is this one here called Foo Fighters. And again, these are all just in the samples directory. And here we have a little battle royale. If we press the simulate key, we can see we've got these two characters, these two groups of characters. They walk towards one another, and then just start battling it out. Again, just some different animation. And if we go into our ice graph again, we can pop into the simulation here and take a look at some of what some of the nodes are doing. So here we have different animations. We got the knockout, the punch. Because we have two different groups of people, these are the two different groups. We have the emitter here, and we're using something like almost like a state machine to control the various states that these characters are in, and that's very easy to set up using ice crowds as well. Number of fighters per team, let's just bump this up to say 30. Press simulate, and look, now we have 30 characters. If we want to export this stuff into Max or Maya, that's actually a very simple thing to do, or even something like Smoke. This uses just the straight-up FBX file format to export this, which is some technology we designed specifically for crowds under export crowd as FBX. And one thing that's very important to point out, when you create your crowd, we're actually creating not instances of all those characters, but we're actually creating one single mesh for your entire crowd simulation. So you can see that all of these crowds, just like picking a grid, this is just one single object, just like picking a sphere or a grid, whatever. This whole crowd simulation is one animated piece of geometry. This makes the evaluation in any system much, much faster because you're not dealing with 10,000 characters. You're literally dealing with just one. So to export that, very simple. Just click on the crowd button here, export as FBX, and we're just going to give this a name. We'll call this, let's call this Punch Out, and I'll replace the existing one. Click OK to the parameters that we see here. And this is going to export all 200 frames, however many frames you have set up there. It's just going to export all those, write the cache file to disk. And now if I go into something like Max, we can just load this up. Click on our load button here. I'm just going to change this to all files so that we see our FBX. Go down here, and there's Punch Out. Click Open. And here's the exact scene that I just exported. Let's go full screen to our viewport. Let's change the number of frames to 200 to match what we exported. And now if I press play, check it out. There's the exact same scene now inside of 3D Studio Max. So awesome there. If we want to bring this into Maya, it's pretty much the same thing. Just launch Maya. We're just going to want to do an import FBX. And we'll just select the same file. That's going to load this up. And just exactly the same. We're going to see that same animation play inside of Maya. And remember, any change that we do, we can easily update either Max, Maya, bring this into Smoke on a Mac, whatever you want to do. So back inside Softimage, here we go. There's our crowd simulation again. And maybe I'll show you just one quick example, which is a fun one here. The snowstorm, we can open this up. This has actually several different ice simulations going on. If I press play, here we go. We have a snowstorm. You can see all these snow particles flying at the characters. They're all hunched over. But what's really neat here is look at the way they're deforming the ground. That's just using the standard footprint deformation tool, which is just another ice compound, which you could take a look at. So if we add 50 characters, you'd see a whole bunch more deformation. In fact, let's just go ahead and do that. So if we select our point cloud, go into the simulation, and we'll just inspect our actors. I could have done this with the menu as well. We'll just change the number of actors to 40, press simulate, and now I've got twice as many characters, all deforming the terrain, just doing exactly what they were doing before. So really simple to set this stuff up. Of course, if you want to get very advanced, you can do that as well. So there's a great balance between simplicity and power when you're using ice and some of the preset stuff we have for crowds. So that's really the big feature inside Soft 2013. There's a number of other features. There's a new high-resolution viewport, which allows you to control some other things, about 30 or 40 new ice compounds to control things other than just crowds. So lots of new stuff in 2013. So I hope you've enjoyed this look, and we'll see you in 2014.
Sketchbook Designer is a powerful freehand drawing and concepting tool. Building on the Sketchbook engine, Designer delivers specific features that make creating variations and exploring ideas efficient, while keeping the workflow intuitive. More than a raster painting package, Sketchbook Designer offers a vector layer type that allows geometry-driven strokes. Unlike typical vector applications, curves can be created and modified naturally. The editing tools allow any curve to be adjusted individually or as a group. Combining curves makes creating complex shapes easy. General tools, like symmetric drawing, work on both raster and vector layers. Interactively define symmetry conditions with the freedom to dynamically change them. The Flood Fill tool is designed with the same paradigm as Sketchbook Designer's Transform tool, which allows not only to quickly set custom gradients, but also to warp it to describe complicated fills. You can also apply custom images or apply smart substance texture to quickly express complex looks. By combining raster sketching and geometry-driven strokes, users can leverage the strengths of each to develop illustrations faster. No matter what world you are creating for, Sketchbook is an essential tool for every creative artist and art department. The end.
Welcome to this presentation of MotionBuilder 2013. My name is Marcel de Jong, and I'll be taking you through some of the new features. What I'd like to start here with is this list of key features, some of the larger things that we added in MotionBuilder 2013. Starting with live data recording to disk. It allows you to essentially use or generate motion capture data, performance capture data that gets recorded directly to the disk and not using RAM, so that limitation is gone. You can have your performers act out entire scenes without interruptions. The data then gets added to the story timeline where it can be edited. So as soon as the FBX files are imported into the story timeline, you can cut up the clips. It also includes a token system for clip naming that facilitates specific asset management requirements. Story clip grouping is a way to manage character clips, character animation clips in context with each other. So you can have a series of characters with animation all be part of the same, what we call a summary clip. And then you cut, scale, edit any of these clips in context with each other, maintaining any kind of interaction or integrity that these characters have in terms of their animations. Heads-up displays allows you to generate displays on top of the camera view, and what that is are essentially rendered real-time metadata into the viewer. These HUD elements can contain static or dynamic data, and we've included a bunch of presets. We also support scaleform UIs and drag and drop type functionality, so you can drag and drop properties into HUDs to reflect values. Next one is Z-depth selections. Just easier to select objects. Allows you to cycle through objects based on the Z-buffer. It's just easier to get to certain objects quicker. Temporary pivots allows you to look through a view if you're working with the director on a certain view and you want to be able to edit or move an object out of the way. You can quickly translate or rotate or scale anything by moving a pivot into the view and applying transformations. Audio stretching allows you to very quickly retime the audio in the story editor to match visuals and then re-render a new audio clip. The video display is a separate display that could be shown on a separate panel for directorial viewing. And then retiming allows you to retime animation through the use of markers, which are now the same in Max as they are in Maya. It allows you to adjust the speed of a selected range of performance, for example. As far as additional features, you can see that we added quite a bit here, and I'll pick out some of the bigger ones. We support the version 3 CGFX libraries. We support 64-bit QuickTime. You can now save off profiling changes, profiling center that we added in 2012. We worked on timecode precision. We have an HIK start pane that we start off with when you start working in HIK. There's an FPS frame per second drop down with the custom setting, and we also added roll bone improvements that allow you to customize this quite a bit more. And then the last one there, editing layout, is resolution independent, the layout editing layout preset. What I'd like to do from now on is get into some of the key features and show you through demos what they look like. So I'm going to start off by opening this story record file, which has a character and a camera in it. And I'm going to switch to a dual view so we can see both on the right the HD cam, look through the camera itself, and on the left a producer perspective that allows us to see exactly what it's seeing in world space. And as I play this back, you can see what that looks like. So the character, for example, has all these red markers. Instead of this character being driven by a character, it's being driven by a set of constraints. And so that would be very much like a live capture scenario. And so if I grab those and go to marker settings, I can then go in here and color code these markers. I can also go in and modify the scale for that. Or I can go in here and kind of change the type to any of the ones listed in this list. And that's useful so that I can identify individual characters if I have more than one character in the scene. We have the same thing set up for the camera. You can see the camera is also being driven by a bunch of these markers. And if I go back up here, let's go ahead and close that real quick and jump into story mode. I can start to set this up for a recording session. So we're essentially simulating or mimicking a live recording session by having the animation come from constraints rather than characters or control rigs. So in here I'm going to go ahead and open up the record path. I'm going to set it to temp. And down here you can see that we have a token system that allows us to control the name, the start timecode value, take name, etc. And you can add to this through the SDK as well. So once this is set up, I want to go ahead and do the same thing for the character. We're going to go ahead and set the record path to the temp directory on the desktop. And then I can go in here and turn on the record option. And if I click it in the track, you can see that we get record options that can be turned on or off. And we also already have translate and rotate turned on. I'm going to go ahead and turn on a few more attributes like roll and field of view. And I'm going to make sure that this is done for the character as well. Now you can also set the record path at the very top there. So this is all set up. Once this is done, we can turn on either the record into RAM or record to disk. The little diskette there is the record to disk icon. And we're going to turn on recording and hit play. And as we do this, you can see it's starting to generate clips in the story editor. So once I get enough data there, we're going to go ahead and stop that, and those clips go blank. And they're essentially stored into that temp directory and converted to FBX files that I can now load. So let's go ahead and load those FBX files. And once they're loaded into the scene, they can actually be edited. So now I can go in and select any clip and start to cut it up. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to turn off the active option for that camera so it's no longer listening to those constraints, which means that as I move my clip, the camera should change and deviate from what the constraints used to tell it what to do. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of cut up this clip into multiple sections. And once that's done, we can maybe go in and select individual segments and delete them and kind of scrub through it, and you can see that the camera now jumps between these clips. We can also kind of overlap this or stretch this out and repeat this. Or what we could do is we can turn on scaling and kind of scale these clips likewise and move it over and do the same thing to that second clip and do a frame blend in between the three clips so we get a soft transition between the three clips. And so we've completely edited and modified the motion of that camera. So next is the summary clip, or the story clip. I'll open up this scene called a zombie scene. We have a bunch of zombies walking around in here. And let's just quickly turn off the grid so we can see the characters a little more clearly. And what I'd like to do is kind of look or play through the animation, give you a sense of what the animation looks like, what the timing looks like. If I go into the story editor, you can see that each of these characters has an animation clip associated with it. And I'm going to right click, insert a story clip, new folder, and drag all the other clips inside of it. Now there's a little switch that allows me to turn on, activate the story clip editing. And now if I scale that story clip, you can see that if I move my time forward and scale my clips, each of the character animation clips will give you slightly different feedback. The characters are moving as I'm scaling. I can also go in here and edit individual clips, just simply move them in their tracks or move the summary clip. And then I can go through and at the summary clip level start to make some cuts on these clips, and you can see how these cuts are applied to all character clips. And then of course from here on out we can either delete clips, or we can spread them out, or we could reorder them, or we could create, like we did before with the camera clips, we can create frame blends between them, so you can actually have them overlap and create softer transitions. And so all editing options still exist, even though they're all grouped together. So the next feature here that I'm going to talk about is the HUD, the heads-up display. So let's open up the HUD file. And in this file, we're going to have a couple of cameras. And one of them is called a crane camera, and the other one is called the pan camera. So two animated cameras in the scene. So I'm going to set this to the crane camera. And let's switch to two displays. I'm going to select the other view and turn that into the pan camera. So once we have that, let's go ahead and play this back real quick and see what that looks like. And you can see the cameras are showing you different aspects of the scene. And I have something selected there just kind of to show you where you're at in the scene. So down in here we have a HUD folder where you can start to store custom HUDs. Under Elements, we can also create new HUDs just simply by grabbing the HUD icon and dragging it into the HUD folder. And in this case, I created a HUD called HUD1, and I'm going to right-click it, rename it to My HUD. So when you double-click on this, it gives you all of the HUD creation options. So we'll go ahead and just associate this with the camera real quick. Right-click on the crane camera, add the camera, and then create a new HUD element. And in this case, let's make that a rectangle. And once we have that added, and it's not just rectangles, you can add text, you have a bunch of presets there, or you can bring in a scaleform UI. But in this case, we'll start with a rectangle. You can see it shows up at the bottom left. I'm going to go ahead and modify the color to black and the opacity to fully opaque. I'm also going to realign this to center on the bottom and leave it sitting at the bottom. So we're centering this on the bottom and we're justifying this on the bottom. Then I can go in here and turn off the uniform scale and scale it in the X direction so that we get a full cover on the bottom part of the frame. And of course you could do the same thing on the top. So maybe we want to add some text or some information like a take name or a scene name. You can see that once we add that, it shows up. Of course we can scale this, we can give this a color, and we can reposition this anywhere within that UI. And once that's done, then we can move on and just start elaborating more and more on these HUDs. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this one, and I'm going to use an existing one, drag it and add it to the camera there. You can see that there's a title and a path, there's time code, and there's some other information on that HUD that we now have access to. And you can stick this on the other cameras as well, of course. So one of the other things that I want to do is I created a second HUD here. We're going to add that to the pan camera, and you can see that it's different information displayed in a slightly different way. And so you can have as many of these HUDs for as many of the cameras you have in the scene. Now, one of the things I'd like to be able to do is go in and open up the HUD node and also make sure that the camera list is opened and look for the camera elevation attribute there. And if I drag that over to the camera elevation attribute on the HUD node, it automatically connects, and you can see that it now displays the dynamic attribute like camera elevation. And when I hit play, you can see that value change as the camera elevation changes over time. So that's a very powerful way to kind of include information that changes over time. Things like time code, things like camera elevation. On the pan camera, you can see there's the amount of memory ticks up, and the scene takes up, and that's kind of a powerful way of getting information displayed. So moving on to the retiming tool, I brought in a little character, and I'm going to go ahead and kind of scrub through this, show you what the animation looks like. And he kind of runs, jumps, kicks, and then walks back, kicks again, walks back again, does a back kick, and that's kind of what it looks like. So what I want to do is I want to grab the hierarchy on this character, which means that the easiest way to do this is to do this in the node view. Now let's go ahead and grab all the nodes, and then in the F-curve editor, all the channels of animation, and translate and rotate. And so all those curves are framed right now, and if I wanted to retime a portion of this, I have to turn on the retiming marker. And then next, what we would like to do is find a good spot where we can start the retiming. So let's say we'll find a point where he jumps off, and I'll double click this so you can see that we can drag this either to leave the keys alone, or we can drag this to actually retime the keys. So the thickness of the bar is indicative of what it does. And then we'll find the point where he lands, place another one, and then we'll find the point where he kind of walks back and stops walking back, and place another one. So maybe the one in the middle is the one that I want to move, so you can see a compression of the keys on the right and a stretching of the keys on the left, but it leaves the curves, the integrity of the curves in place. So it doesn't mess up your tangents, which is really nice. And the other thing that's really nice is that these retiming tools are the same in Max and Maya. And so you can see that as I'm scrubbing through, we get a dramatic slowdown in that first portion there where the keys are stretch, and a speed up for the rest of it. Welcome to this presentation of Mudbox 2013. My name is Marcel. I'm going to be taking you through some of the new features. This list of general improvements starts off with customizability, full customizability of the Mudbox UI. We also added the view cube to allow you to quickly jump into orthographic views. You can now also rename nodes in the properties window. You will also see the names and the objects listed in the paint layers window as you're working on an object. We added a fall off editor to allow you to get better control over your brushes. We added a reset properties button that allows you to quickly reset all the properties on a brush. We have some mesh renderer drop-downs for plugin renders. A curve toolset was added in 2013. Also a way to quickly delete unused materials listed in the outliner portion of Mudbox. Translate, rotate, scale works on many multiple objects very quickly. We have a flood from camera switch, and we also support 3D connection devices. In terms of painting, we have an adjust color presets with new presets, a blur hotkey much like the smooth hotkey in sculpting for painting. We support 16-bit PSD and floating point TIFFs now for import and export. We have a monochrome paint layer optimization button or switch in the prefs window that allows you to have monochrome paint layers take advantage of memory optimization. And what we added in the SAP, the Subscription Advantage Pack, is the Gigatexel engine with a paint memory buffer budget percentage value. With regards to sculpting and modeling, we now have the ability to be able to select faces. You can delete faces at the base level or select shells and borders, as well as support for creasing and hard edges, which started in the SAP. Of the previous release, we can tangent mirror with stencils and have a stencil offset property. For map extraction, we have a PTEX dropdown and a resolution limit, a 32K map extraction value, bump to normal conversion in paint layers, and applying PTEX files as displacement maps can all be done from the Mudbox UI. So the next step is getting into some of the demos and illustrating some of the features that I've just mentioned. So here we are in Maya, and I'm going to focus in on the model that's been used for many demos, and I'm going to specifically apply a split to this dress using the split tool, where we can just quickly snap the points and kind of go across polys so that we can delete these polys. And what I'd like to be able to do is bring that into Mudbox as a crease. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and select the edge loop and then select some of the vertices to which I would like to be able to preserve the corners. And in Viewport 2.0, if I get into my crease tool and slide it over, you can see how we can crease. We get a kind of an iconic display of how much it's creasing. And we also get the crease node. And if I jump into the crease node, you can see that we have edge creasing and vertex creasing, which you can also edit after the fact. So we've added the creasing information, and that's the first step in Maya to prepare this to go to Mudbox. Now the other thing that I'd like to be able to do is go into the UV texture editor and kind of cut this up into several shells. And the reason why I want to do that is because I want to be able to select based on UV shells. So essentially these UVs are garbage UVs. I'm not going to use these for a final model. I'm just using these for selection purposes. You can see how I'm cutting edge loops, cutting them in the UV texture editor and moving over the shell. And I kind of undid that and popped that back. That will come across into Mudbox. I want to make sure that for FBX export, if I set this to FBX, we can go into presets, make sure smooth mesh is turned on and split vertex normals is turned off, and that we have 3 selected for smooth mesh preview. If I then export this to Mudbox, you can see this comes in. I'm going to make sure that as we're subdividing, we're preserving the borders and we're preserving creases as well as hard edges. So that when I subdivide, you can see that we go up in resolution and preserve the crease information. Let's go ahead and create a sculpt layer. I'm going to jump into my shell selection tool to pick the individual shells. And then Shift M will allow me to freeze that so that those areas will not be affected by any sculpting. I also have a mirror sculpt brush turned on. I'll select my brush, increase the size, and just kind of paint in some of the sculpted creases that I want in the dress. So as I do that, I'm kind of applying these, and I'm also hitting Control to invert it in certain areas to kind of get an opposite effect until it's all the way done. Let's add a little bit in the front as well. I hit Shift to kind of soften that up, and that's kind of what I want to do. If I turn on the layer, you can see as I turn it on and off how it comes in and jumps out. Let's increase the resolution to level 3 and select a base border. We use the border selection tool and then Shift triangular bracket, increase or grow the selection. Let's create an extra layer, increase the size of the brush, hit Shift M to freeze the selection, and then sculpt to kind of get a layered look to this dress. So let's go ahead and just kind of sculpt this out very gently and very little, so we kind of get this look of a second or layered dress. Okay, so the next thing I'd like to do is to create another layer there, and we're going back to a UV shell. And you can also use, if you want to, you can also select the bottom, invert the selection, Shift I, and use a sculpt tool to kind of add something that looks like a belt or a wrapper, kind of like a waistband that runs all the way around with mirroring turned on, and then hold down Shift to kind of smooth that out. So we get a soft transition. And then when that's done, we can go to a level 4 for even more detail, create another sculpt layer, and say let's go ahead and select the UV shell for the waistband and increase the size because we're at a higher resolution right now. We have to do a Shift triangular bracket, do a freeze. There we go. And we can use a stencil to transfer some really fine details onto the surface. So there it is. And I'm going to use the mirrored feature on. I'm going to make sure that local X mirroring is turned on. A very large brush with low intensity, and kind of grab everything on the dress. So front, maybe back. And if you want to exclude the dress underneath, the fake second dress, you would also have to freeze that, of course. So once this is done, I'm going to dial down the intensity of this layer to maybe about 5 or 6, 7% or something like that. So we get a very subtle texture there. The next step in this process would be to say, okay, let's look at the nodes associated with this, and I would like to be able to select this and rename this, and this we can do directly in the Properties window now. You can see how that updates. And if we go to the Layers window for this, there we go, you can see that it updates there as well. So we always know what it is that we're working on, which is kind of important. I'm going to go ahead and select the stencil, bring that up, and select the projection brush so we get the accurate color on the stencil. Let's scale that down using the S hotkey and use the view cube to kind of jump into an orthographic projection or a front view. And you can see how I can navigate with that view cube around my dress. I can also go in here and flip horizontal or vertical. I can go ahead and rotate this repeated stencil. I can tile the stencil. I can go ahead and flood this from the camera position. And as I do that, you can see that it transfers the paint to the dress. We'll do the same in the back. Of course, on the side, we could do this on the side as well, but we're just introducing more artifacts. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select a brush with no fall off, a solid brush that kind of helps mimic the detail in the texture, and hand paint this in on one side. And we're automatically mirroring this on the other side as well. And so you might want to kind of fill this in where we are missing some paint. So once that is done, we can get a little closer to this dress and maybe add some detail in areas where we would like it, like let's say the waistband, for example, or the wrapper around her waist. So I'm going to jump into my curve tool set, and I'm going to use the Create Curve tool and turn mirroring off and kind of paint the curve along the topology of the surface. Now you don't really have to do this all that accurately, because later on you can use the Grab Curve tool and the Smooth Curve tool to kind of reposition this curve exactly the way you would like. Also, as you get close to the endpoint of a curve, as I'm navigating around this model, you can see there's an orange dot that shows up that automatically connects your next stroke. And then when you get close to the beginning point, it'll automatically close this curve. So at this point, I'm ready to kind of reposition this and smooth this out so that I get exactly what I want. And in this case, I want a curve that sits roughly in the middle of that band, that wrapper. Now, once this curve is created, you can go ahead and use the Stroke on Curve command to kind of run any brush along the length of that curve all the way around. And what's nice about this is that you can guide your strokes exactly the way you would like. So I'm smoothing this out, and once we get to smoother results, there we go. You can also create curves that obviously sit on the camera plane rather than the surface and do something very similar. So I'm going to go ahead and use a paint erase. We're going to erase the paint in the areas where we painted. I'm going to scale down my brush to the width of that waistband and select a profile that's a solid profile and hit Stroke on Curve. You can see how it erases everything all the way around. So that is done on the original paint layer, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another paint layer. And with that new paint layer, I'm going to select, or create rather, a brush and use the new fall off editor to add points and very quickly and intuitively create a profile that's a little more sophisticated than just a basic ease in, ease out brush. So in this case, we're going to get this profile from left to right, is from the center to the perimeter of the brush. And I'm going to store this to the fall off shelf. And you can store it to any of the other shelves as well if you like. And then we'll pick a color in here, something like this, maybe a little darker, and there we go. We're going to go to the surface and do a right click, Stroke on Curve, and you can see that's kind of like a target symbol that keeps repeating, keeps overlapping. As I'm painting this on the surface, you can see what it looks like. And so this is kind of one way to customize your brushes and what it is that you can do with your brushes. So what I'd like to do next is kind of reorder the layers so that the dress texture is the top layer, and it kind of trims out exactly what it is that we did with that stroke on curve. Let's go ahead and duplicate that texture as well. And we'll create a specular channel, and we're going to move this into the specular channel. You can see that moving layers like this much faster. So in this case, we have a specular texture that is a color texture, and if I go to solo as diffuse, you can actually see this as a color texture. And if I make this black and white, obviously now we have a black and white specular texture. And so by turning this on, you can see that the characteristics of that specular texture have changed a bit. So those presets are quite useful in terms of adjusting colors. Let's go ahead and duplicate this. I'm going to use that same black and white texture as a bump map, transferring it into the bump channel. And so now we get a little bit of a relief, which is too intense. And if I get a little closer, you can see what it looks like. We can turn this on and turn this off, kind of give you a sense of what that does. And in this same UI, we can convert this to a normal map. It'll ask you if it needs to be a tangent normal map, which is the default. We say yes. Let's turn off the bump map. Leave the normal map turned on. And by having this normal map in the scene, we can start to move the light around the geometry to get a proper light response off the relief of the texture. And you can see that as I'm rotating the light, how the dress is kind of updating or showing you the relief properly. Speaking of normals, for any of the maps in here except for transfer paint layers, we can now also bake out 32K maps. Right here at the very bottom, you can see 32K maps that we can bake out. We also have a PTEX preset now, PTEX switch in here. Instead of a texture, we can go to PTEX, and a PTEX resolution value. And so all these things were added in the map extraction window. So at some point, let's say we're finished, you might want to spend a little bit more time on this than I just did. We can select the object and bring this back to Maya. And we can send it at the current resolution or as the base mesh. If we send it as the base mesh, we could have also just brought the textures across. There we go. Once that's in, we have what we need, and we can turn the girl back on to see it in context. Thank you.
Okay, well that's going to round out, as I said, the Ultimate Suite. You can see here there's quite a few packages inside of the Ultimate Suite that you can take advantage of, including 3ds Max, Maya, Softimage, MotionBuilder, Mudbox, and Sketchbook Designer. Now, one of the things to mention about the suite is you might be thinking that no one person uses all of this software, and while that may very well be the case, a lot of different studios out there are looking to the Ultimate Suite and putting it on a machine so that in the case that they have maybe freelancers come in or different artists working on different projects, you might have a project based on a Maya pipeline, for example, and use 3ds Max just for its ability to do cat animation or character animation toolkit. Or for example, you might have a 3ds Max pipeline and want to do Softimage ice particles. And just to keep in mind that you don't have to know all of these packages, but they really are a well-rounded toolkit for doing everything from game development to visual effects for television and film. So with that, I want to thank you for your time. I do encourage you to keep checking out our webinar series. And for more information, please visit the area at area.autodesk.com. Thanks.